Hello, I need your advice. You won't believe what happened to me, but I can no longer keep it to myself. Imagine this. Your wife betrays you, and you find out about it by accident. But here's what I did to get revenge. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about how I decided to take back my honor, and maybe it could change the way you view your own relationships. I wasn't a superhero. I was just an ordinary man who seemed to have no strength left to change anything. But I chose to act, and you can't imagine how it all ended. So stay with me, and I'll share all the shocking details of this story with you. I am an ordinary office worker from a small town in upstate New York. My day is an endless cycle of monotony. Waking up at 7 in the morning, coffee, the commute to work, piles of paperwork waiting for signatures, and returning home, where Sarah is waiting for me. She's my wife of 8 years. I used to think this was happiness, stability, a cozy home, and the certainty of tomorrow. But now I know it was an illusion. Sarah is beautiful, very beautiful. She has always been the center of attention, while I remained her shadow. Her laughter would fill every room. She always knew how to captivate a crowd. And me? My presence was as vibrant as an office stapler. I was order. She was chaos. And perhaps that was what drew us together in the first place. Our relationship began to change about 3 years ago, though I didn't notice it immediately. At first, it was small things. Her gaze turning indifferent when I talked about my day, or our long walks being replaced with her yoga classes or meetings with friends. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, something all couples go through. We had grown accustomed to each other, and the novelty had worn off. But something in her behavior shifted so much that even I couldn't ignore it. Sarah stopped asking me about my day and started checking her phone more often. Her meetings stretched late into the night. She'd come home humming unfamiliar tunes, and despite my questions, she'd go straight to the shower. I wanted to talk, but I always held back. What could I say? I wasn't even ready to admit to myself that something was wrong. My job brought me no joy, and I was oddly relieved not to have to talk to Sarah about it. She didn't ask, and I didn't want to share. My life was slowly fading into a gray blur, and I had simply accepted it. One day, when I came home earlier than usual, I overheard her phone conversation. She was standing in the kitchen with her back to me, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "No, sweetheart, I miss you too. Shall we meet tomorrow?" Her laugh was light and carefree, something I hadn't heard in a long time. I froze. The whole world seemed to stop. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sweetheart? She had never called me that. I stood in the doorway, waiting for her to end the call. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought she might hear it. When Sarah put down the phone and turned around, her expression became serious. "Oh, you're home," she said, as if nothing had happened. I said nothing. For the first time in a long while, I felt something stronger than my apathy. Fear, mixed with anger. But I didn't say a word. She walked past me, and I remained standing there in the kitchen doorway. That was just the beginning. After that conversation, I couldn't return to normal life. Everything that once seemed insignificant now made me suspicious. Did Sarah stay in the shower longer than usual? I wondered if she was washing off another man's cologne. Did her phone ring late at night? Felt like she deliberately left the room so I wouldn't hear. One morning, I decided to check her phone. It wasn't easy. My hands trembled as I reached for her purse. Inside was her smartphone, locked, of course. Password I didn't know. I could remember trivial details like her favorite coffee or the name of her favorite TV show. But her password? That was something I'd never thought to notice. "What are you looking for?" Her voice cut through the silence like thunder. I jumped back, startled. She stood in the doorway, dressed and ready for work, a faint hint of suspicion in her expression. Nothing. Just thought I'd grab some money for coffee?" I stammered, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks. "It's in my wallet." "As always, Jack," she said evenly, though her gaze felt unervingly sharp. She left, and I was alone again, standing there like a criminal caught in the act. Something inside me began to crack. I couldn't keep ignoring the obvious. That evening, when I got back from work, I noticed a men's cologne in her car. It had a subtle scent of wood and spice, completely unlike anything I wore. Sarah never used anything like it. I sat there in the car, inhaling that scent as if it could give me answers. In the kitchen, I cautiously asked, "Sarah, did you give someone a ride?" Without looking up from her phone, she quickly replied, "No, why do you ask?" "Nothing. I just thought the car smelled a little different." She looked at me, narrowing her eyes. "Probably someone parked next to us." "Jack, seriously? Are you sniffing the car now?" Her laugh was nervous. I wanted to say something in return, but once again, I stayed silent. Weakness had always been my defining trait. Week after week, I asked myself the same question. What should I do? I had never been a man of action. In every conflict, I backed down, convincing myself it was temporary, that everything would fix itself. But now these thoughts were eating me alive. Every night, I lay in our bed, listening to her steady breathing, wondering who she spent time with when I wasn't around. One day, I decided to follow her. She said she was going to a friend's party. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I quickly got into mine and trailed behind. My heart was pounding furiously. She didn't go to any friend's house. After about 20 minutes, her car stopped outside a small restaurant. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out. He hugged her and she hugged him back. Her laugh sounded as genuine as it had years ago when she used to laugh with me. It wasn't just a moment. It was the truth cutting through me like a blade. She loved him. I sat in my car, staring into the distance. My body was frozen, but inside me, a storm raged. This was the moment my old world burned down. Through the window, I watched Sarah laughing and talking animatedly with that man. Her movements were light and effortless. She looked happy, happier than she had been with me in years. I tried to understand how I had come to this point. How had I allowed myself to become so weak and blind? Their evening at the restaurant lasted over 2 hours. I saw them ordering wine, her leaning in closer to him, touching his hand. He, tall and confident, smiled at her as if she were his whole world, and I knew then what I had lost. When they stepped outside, the tension in my body reached its peak. I thought about jumping out of my car and doing something, making a scene, asking what was going on, forcing her to explain. But instead, I stayed put, holding my breath. They got into his car and drove away, leaving me alone with the emptiness. That night, I got home before her. My hands shook as I made coffee, trying to steady myself. My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. Where had they gone? What had they done? Was this the first time? Or had their meetings been going on for years? Sarah returned late, around midnight. Her face glowed as if she had just come back from a dream. "How was your evening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, wonderful. We sat around reminiscing. It was so much fun," she said, not even glancing at me. Her carefree tone was like a knife to my heart. I looked at her as if for the first time, realizing just how distant she had become. The next few days I spent on edge, searching for any proof. I checked her phone, but there was nothing suspicious. All the messages had been erased, the call logs wiped. Sarah was clearly being careful. But one day I got lucky. I noticed she had accidentally left her email open on her laptop. In the archive folder, I found an email confirmation for a hotel booking that weekend. The name on it was familiar, Ben Mitchell. It was the same man I had seen at the restaurant. I printed the email like evidence for a trial. Now I had proof. But what next? My old weakness resurfaced, and I couldn't bring myself to confront her. On Friday evening, Sarah said she was leaving for a work conference. She even added, "Don't wait up for me, Jack. I might get back late." She kissed me on the cheek, for the first time in months, and that infuriated me even more. When the door closed behind her, I felt empty. But this time, something shifted inside me. I could no longer just sit and endure. This was the moment a thought of revenge was born. Sarah left, and I remained in the silence of our home. The rooms felt vast, cold, like the empty halls of an abandoned house. Her things were everywhere, but their presence no longer comforted me. All I felt was anger. Not just at her, but at myself too. I knew I had to do something. The most important thing was not to sit idly. Yet, instead of decisive action, I dialed Tom, my best friend since high school. He was the only one I could trust. "Hey Jack, long time no hear." Tom answered with his characteristic ease. "Tom, I need to talk," I said, my words too soft for the storm I felt inside. "Something happen?" "Yes, Sarah. I think she's cheating on me." I forced the words out. There was a pause on the line. Tom sighed. "Are you sure? I saw her with another man. At a restaurant. They acted like they were in love. And it's not the first time." "Damn, that's serious." His tone changed, becoming more serious. "Have you talked to her about it?" "No," I sighed. "I don't know how." Tom laughed, but his laugh was tinged with pity more than humor. "Jack, you're always like this. You have all the evidence, but you sit there torturing yourself. If you want to change something, you have to act. And what can I do? Confront her? What will that change? She'll just say I'm boring, weak, and she's probably right," I said, bitterness seeping into my voice. "You know, if you think you can't win, at least don't be the victim. Stand your ground," Tom advised. His words sounded so casual, as if this were a simple game, but to me, it felt like climbing a mountain. After the call, I was left alone with my thoughts. They felt heavy, like stones. I wanted to smash something, destroy something, to release the tension building inside me. Instead, I sat down at the table and started writing. It was a letter to Sarah. No, not one I intended to send her. It was more like a confession I couldn't speak out loud. I wrote about how I had felt all these years, about my weakness, about how her indifference had torn me apart. I admitted that I knew about her betrayal but didn't know what to do next. The letter became a kind of scream from my soul. It didn't solve my problems, but at least it helped me understand just how broken I was. Later that evening, I sat in front of the TV, but I wasn't watching it. My mind was elsewhere. Sarah was out there somewhere with Ben, and I knew they were laughing together, sharing dreams and desires I had long stopped giving her. I suddenly realized my hatred was no longer limited to Sarah. It extended to him, to that perfect man who had taken my place in her life. Ben hadn't just taken her away. He had pushed me to a breaking point I had never reached before. I called Tom again. "You know what? You're right," I said. "I won't be the victim anymore." Tom laughed. "Now this sounds interesting. Just don't do anything stupid, buddy." "No," I replied. "Everything will be calculated to the last detail." This was the moment the idea of revenge started to take clearer shape. The next day I was on edge. My thoughts revolved around one thing. I had to do something. Not just uncover the truth, but make Sarah and Ben feel even a fraction of the emptiness and anger consuming me. But I couldn't act without a plan. Spontaneity had never been my strong suit. That night, with Sarah still not home, I sat at my computer and started digging for information about Ben. His last name and phone number were in the hotel booking confirmation. It was a small thread, but enough to unravel the rest. Within a few hours, I knew he worked at a law firm in a neighboring city, that he had no children but was divorced. His social media profile looked like a polished catalog. Successful, attractive, a confident man. But there was one detail that made me shudder. He had a girlfriend. A beautiful woman he had recently posted pictures of, captioning something like, "My heart." Her name was Lily. As I looked at her photos, an unexpected thought crossed my mind. If Sarah had destroyed my life, why couldn't I do the same to Ben? When Sarah came home, it was already past midnight. She quietly slipped into the bedroom, trying not to make noise. Her perfume mingled with the scent of alcohol and another man. I lay in the dark, pretending to sleep, but my mind was racing. The next day, I told her I'd be working late. It was a lie, but she didn't even ask why. Her indifference hurt more than any words could. I drove to the city where Lily lived. Finding her in real life wasn't difficult. In one of Ben's photos, he had tagged a cafe she often visited. When I saw her in person, I was surprised by how different she was from Sarah. Lily was sweet, simple, with none of the flashy confidence Sarah exuded. She seemed like someone who valued authenticity. I sat at a nearby table and ordered a coffee. First, I just watched. She was reading a book, occasionally smiling as she immersed herself in the story. The scene was so idyllic that, for a moment, I hesitated in my intentions. But then an image of Sarah and Ben together flashed through my mind, and the hesitation vanished. "Excuse me," I finally said to her, pretending it was by chance. "Is that A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara?" She looked up and smiled. "Yes, are you familiar with it?" "I read it once. Heavy, but a beautiful book," I replied. This brief exchange was the first step. To her, I was just a stranger sharing a love for literature. To me, it was the starting point of a bigger plan. Over the next few days, I found ways to appear in the same places Lily frequented. At first, it seemed like coincidence. We talked a few times, sharing thoughts about books, movies, even life. I didn't push her or rush anything, but I noticed how she was starting to feel comfortable around me. In these moments, I felt conflicted. Was this right? I knew I was using her, yet I also saw how Lily deserved better than Ben. And perhaps that was my twisted way of justifying it. I'd come home and see Sarah, acting as if nothing had happened. Her life was carefree, while I was finally starting to feel like I was taking control of mine. This was just the beginning of the game I had started, not for myself, but to make them feel the weight of their actions. The following week, I found myself back at the cafe where Lily was reading her favorite books. This time, she noticed me first. "Jack." Her voice sounded warm, almost cheerful. "Hey, Lily," I responded, pretending it was another coincidence. We spent hours talking about trivial things. Books, travel, favorite spots in the city. She was open, and I skillfully concealed my true motives. The more I learned about her, the harder it became to ignore how different she was from Sarah. Lily told me she worked as a lecturer at a local college, loved animals, and dreamed of traveling the world. There was a sincerity in her eyes that struck me more than I had anticipated. "Are you married?" she suddenly asked. I froze for a second. Should I lie, or tell a half-truth? "Yes, but it's complicated." I decided to leave room for sympathy. She nodded as if she understood. "I'm not always happy in my relationship either," she admitted, and I realized this was exactly what I needed. We started seeing each other more often. Lily no longer felt like just a tool to get back at Ben. She was a living, breathing person opening up to me, and that scared me. I thought about Sarah again. Her lies, her indifference, her betrayal. She never once noticed my absence in the evenings. Her world had long revolved around another man, and she didn't even try to hide it. My plan was becoming clearer each day, but a crack began to form in my resolve. What if I was dragging someone into this chaos who didn't deserve the pain? One evening, I sat in my car outside Lily's house. We had agreed to meet for coffee, but I arrived early on purpose to observe. Her windows glowed with warm light, and the house exuded a cozy atmosphere. Ben's car was parked nearby. He was there with her, in her space, in her life. This scene irritated me more than I expected. It reminded me of how Sarah and I used to live when we were still happy. Now, I felt as though Lily was a part of me, even if that thought was selfish and baseless. Finally, the door opened, and Ben stepped out. He looked so confident, so carefree, just like he had in that restaurant with Sarah. I watched him until he drove away, and only then did I make my way to Lily's door. She greeted me with that same open smile that had become so familiar. "Hi, come on in. I've just freed up some space," she joked, referring to Ben. We sat in her kitchen, sipping coffee and talking about life. She confided that she had been feeling distant from Ben lately. "He's wonderful," she said with a slight sigh. "But sometimes it feels like there's no real connection between us." I didn't tell her I knew why that was. Instead, I listened, nodding as though I understood, even as my heart raced at her words. As the evening drew to a close, she suddenly touched my hand. "Jack, I'm glad we met. You're real." Her words caught me off guard, stirring a mix of emotions. I had come to her with revenge in mind, but now I wasn't so sure it was the right thing to do. Driving home, I thought about it all. Lily was supposed to be part of the plan, but she had become something more. Meanwhile, Sarah carried on with her life full of lies, while my life seemed to be revolving more and more around Lily. I knew this was dangerous. I had to tread carefully to avoid losing control. Yet, it felt like control was already slipping away. Days blurred into a cycle of chance encounters with Lily and cold, empty evenings at home with Sarah. She had almost entirely stopped showing interest in my life. Her world revolved around Ben, and it was obvious. Every call, every smile, every late night at work had become my new normal. I knew my feelings for Lily were growing beyond the boundaries of my original plan. She was kind, genuine, and naive. Perhaps that's why her lack of connection with Ben felt inevitable. He wasn't someone who valued authenticity. He valued control and victory, and now he had control over two lives, mine and Lily's. One day, Lily invited me to an art exhibition in the city center. I accepted without hesitation. That evening felt like a chance to escape reality for a few hours. At the exhibition, we both seemed at ease. She laughed, sharing stories about her youthful attempts at painting, and I found myself feeling genuinely happy for the first time in a long while. We stood by a large canvas when she suddenly asked, "Jack, are you happy in your marriage?" Her question caught me off guard. I looked away, searching for the right words. "No," I finally admitted after a long pause. She didn't press further, but I saw understanding in her eyes. It was a moment that brought us closer than any conversation about books or art ever could. After the exhibition, we sat in a cozy cafe nearby. At one point, she placed a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You deserve better." Those words stayed with me even after I returned home. Sarah, as usual, was distant, not even asking where I had been. Her indifference was no longer surprising, but it no longer hurt either. It only fueled a cold anger. I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, and realized that my revenge was taking on a new form. It was no longer just about causing pain to Ben or Sarah. It had become a fight to reclaim the dignity they had stolen from me. And now Lily was the key to that. My meetings with Lily became more frequent. We saw each other several times a week, talked for hours, and no longer hid our mutual affection. She was becoming closer to me than Sarah had been in years. At the same time, cracks were starting to show in Sarah's world as well. One evening, when she came home much later than promised, I decided to provoke her. "How's work?" I asked in a neutral tone, watching her reaction. She flinched slightly but quickly composed herself. "Fine. Busy." "Oh, must be really busy if you can't even call," I said casually, though the subtext was clear. She ignored the hint and went to the bathroom. Her calmness was infuriating, but at the same time, it spoke volumes. She didn't even try to offer an excuse. The next day, I met Lily again. This time, we went for a walk in the park. Her voice was calm, but I could tell something was bothering her. "Jack," she finally said, "I need to ask you something." "I'm listening," I replied, trying to appear relaxed. "You know I'm dating Ben, right?" The question felt like a test, as though she was trying to make sure I understood what I had gotten myself into. I nodded. "I know. Don't you think it's strange how close we've gotten?" She looked at me as if searching for an answer in my eyes. I shrugged. "I think it's natural when there's a connection between people. And I think you feel it too." Lily didn't respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. That evening, I revisited my plan. I knew I couldn't keep stalling. The situation was growing more complicated. Lily was starting to suspect that her relationship with Ben was nearing its end. Sarah, meanwhile, continued acting as though I didn't exist. I decided it was time to act decisively. The next time I met Lily, I had to make a move. Ben needed to feel what it was like to lose control. Sarah needed to understand what it meant to be left with nothing. When Lily and I met at a cafe, I immediately noticed she looked tired. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and her smile was forced. She sat, staring at her coffee, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Is something wrong?" I asked, sensing the change in the atmosphere. Lily sighed deeply and looked at me. "I know there's a connection between us, but it's hard to tell if it's real, or if we're just trying to fill some kind of emptiness. I didn't respond immediately. I could have said that what we had was more than just a connection, that it was greater than anything I could have imagined. But I chose to stay silent. My heart was beating faster than usual, and I knew that every word I said carried weight. I wasn't just trying to be with her. I was trying to reshape her world. Lily, I understand your doubts, but I know for certain that what I feel isn't just emptiness, I said after a pause. She held my gaze in silence. I could see her thinking, and I realized this was my chance. I want to be with you, Lily, and I know it's the right thing to do. She didn't respond, but her gaze deepened, and I noticed her leaning slightly closer to me. The moment felt irreversible. But before I could say more, her phone buzzed. Lily glanced at the screen and put the phone back on the table. I saw her expression change instantly, becoming cold and distant. It was Ben. Sorry, Jack. I have to go. She stood up quickly, and I was left sitting there, watching her as she walked out of the cafe. I remained in silence. Something about her detached behavior made me realize Lily was making a choice too, and I was no longer part of it. She was going to Ben, and I had a choice to make as well. This was the moment everything shifted. I couldn't wait any longer. That evening, I drove to Ben's house, knowing this would be the final step. My revenge wouldn't be simple. I walked up to the door, waiting for the right moment, and rang the bell. He opened the door, looking at me with surprise. "What do you want, Jack?" My words were brief. "I've come to take back what's mine." When Ben opened the door, I felt everything inside me freeze. Was I ready for this? I wasn't sure. Ben stood in the doorway, slightly surprised but also visibly irritated. My presence clearly unsettled him, and this was only the beginning. "What do you want?" His voice was sharp. He clearly hadn't expected to see me. I took a deep breath, deciding not to delay. "I came to talk to you about your woman, Ben. About Lily." I saw his expression shift. First surprise, then a flicker of fear, followed by aggression. He stepped forward, his voice rising. "You have no right. What the hell do you think you're doing? And you?" I shot back without hesitation. "You think you have the right to meddle in my life by claiming her, but I'm not allowed to make my own choice?" He laughed nervously, as if trying to mask his anger. "This is none of your business. Lily is my woman. Stay away from her, Jack." I looked at him coldly. "Your woman? Maybe, but I can prove you're no better than me. You don't even know how to love her." He moved closer abruptly, but I was ready. "Get out of here before I make you," he said, his tone turning more menacing as he realized I wasn't planning to leave. I stood firm, looking him directly in the eyes. My determination was unshakable. I wasn't here by accident. I was here to reclaim control, and this moment wasn't going to be my last. Feeling the anger and desire for revenge surge through me was both liberating and terrifying. I realized that by doing this, I had crossed an invisible line. Despite his threats, I remained at his doorstep. His nervous sigh indicated he understood the situation was slipping from his grasp. Ben opened his mouth to speak but said nothing. I, however, had made my choice. I turned my attention back to Lily. This was my last chance to make her decide. The next day, I was standing at her door. Now, my goal wasn't just revenge. I had come to see if she could truly leave everything behind. My fight for control wasn't over yet. Lily didn't protest when I entered. She was sitting in her living room, staring at the wall as if waiting. "You know why I'm here, Lily?" I said, standing in the doorway. She looked at me and sighed. "You're here again, and I already know what you want." It was then I realized I had truly taken over her thoughts. But this was no longer just about revenge. This was my final move in a game where the stakes were higher than anything else. Lily sat on the couch, her hands trembling slightly. I could see the unease in her eyes, and it was clear. She already understood where this was going. The distance between us felt like only a few steps, but for her, it was a chasm. "Lily?" I began, standing by the door. "We've been playing this game for a long time, haven't we?" She looked up and gave me a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired, as if her days were filled with endless thoughts of what had gone wrong again. "I don't know what you want, Jack," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. I stepped closer to her, ignoring her attempts to keep her distance. "I know what I want. I want you to make a choice. Are you with Ben? Or are you with someone who truly sees you, Lily?" Her eyes filled with sorrow. I could see the battle between wanting to be with him and wanting to be with me raging in her heart. She closed her eyes as if trying to banish the thoughts. "Don't force me, Jack," she whispered. "I'm not ready." I didn't stop. I knew it was now or never. "Do you want to be with him? With Ben? He'll never be able to give you what I can." She fell silent, but I could feel that her decision was moments away. The comfort of her home felt different now, as though the entire space had been consumed by an immeasurable tension. "Do you really want this?" she asked, her gaze sad but resolute. "Do you want me to choose between you and him?" I looked at her firmly. My resolve was unwavering. "Yes, I do, and I'm ready to start fresh, without hesitation. The choice is yours." The silence between us stretched on, and every sound, every movement felt amplified. I knew my decision had been made long ago. Now it was just a matter of seeing if she was ready to accept it. She took a deep breath, her eyes becoming serious again. "I don't know, Jack. It's too complicated." We stood in the stillness. In that moment, I realized that my life no longer belonged to me, or even to Lily. It had become part of this struggle for control. "You will be ready, Lily," I said, my words heavy with intent. "You just don't know it yet." The next morning, I woke early, still turning over the events of the day before in my mind. Lily hadn't given me a clear answer, but her reaction had spoken volumes. She was on the edge, ready to decide, but something was holding her back. I could feel it. The problem was that she was still tethered to the past, to Ben. Sitting at the kitchen table, I mulled over what might come next. Images of her face, her words, her glances surfaced in my mind. I realized I was playing a game where the rules weren't mine to set. Even though I tried to take control, I was still at the mercy of her decisions. That same day, I met with Sarah. She looked just as I remembered, detached and indifferent. She didn't ask where I had been yesterday or inquire about my mood. It seemed she no longer cared. "Why do you look so deep in thought?" she asked, sitting across from me in the kitchen. I looked at her and, unable to hide my frustration, replied, "Do you even know what I'm doing with my life?" She shrugged. "You're just being yourself, Jack. What do you expect me to say?" I didn't answer. Her indifference no longer hurt the way it once had. Now, I saw her as part of a mechanism in which I played no role. My mission was different. My focus was Lily. Lost in thought, I realized I needed to act quickly. Standing idly by and waiting was no longer an option. I had to see this through before it was too late. I called Lily again. This time, she answered with a clear weariness in her voice. "Hi, Jack. How are you?" I need to see you. Now. I'm not sure it's the right moment. Maybe we should wait a little longer." Her words stung, though she didn't intend them to, but I couldn't wait any longer. "Lily, if you don't decide now, I won't wait anymore. You have to make a choice." The silence on the line lasted several seconds before she replied, her voice calmer but slightly strained. "All right, I'll come over in an hour." When I opened the door and saw her, Lily looked like someone trapped in her own thoughts. She wasn't the same as before. She was serious, even a little frightened. I realized her internal struggle had finally reached its peak. "I'm ready," she said, avoiding my gaze. I didn't respond, but my heart raced. This was the moment when everything that had come before ceased to matter. The choice had been made. "You're ready?" I asked, standing right in front of her. She sighed, her gaze steady and resolute. "Yes, I'm ready." This was a step into the unknown. I knew there was no turning back now. Lily was ready to choose me, and I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. But before we could take that decisive step, my thoughts drifted back to Ben, to his world, and to whatever awaited me at the end of this road. We sat in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Lily was ready to make her choice, but something in her expression made me hesitate. She sat on the couch, her hands still trembling, but this time I saw in her eyes the resolve I needed. I couldn't let this moment pass. "Lily, I'm done playing games," I said, breaking the silence. "You have to choose me now, or I'm walking away." She lifted her head, meeting my gaze. There were no doubts left in her eyes, but her voice, when she spoke, still carried the weight of an inner struggle. "I don't know if I can do this, Jack. Ben, he means a lot to me, but you do too." Her words hit me, but I couldn't let her retreat. I couldn't leave everything for later again. I had come too far, and now there was no turning back. "Lily," I said, stepping closer. "Ben is betraying you, and yet you're still trying to prove something to him. You don't have to do that. You deserve more." She froze, her eyes filling with tears, though she didn't let them fall. Lily took a deep breath and looked at me again. "You're right, Jack. I can't take this anymore." I felt the weight in her words, something profound that had been growing inside her for a long time. Yet I could still sense her inner conflict. Ben had been a part of her life, and accepting that it was over wasn't easy. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was a part of her identity she needed to leave behind. "You've made the right choice," I said, sitting beside her. "Now we can start over." She lowered her gaze before finally responding. "I want that, Jack, but I'm not ready to let go of everything yet. It's all too painful." She raised her eyes to meet mine, and I saw how hard this was for her. Her words didn't mean she was retreating, but her heart wasn't yet ready to embrace all the changes, and I was here to help her through it. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. She leaned into me, her trembling hands resting on my back. In that moment, it felt like together we could face anything. But with each passing moment, I felt Ben's presence looming. He wouldn't let this go. He could already sense he was losing control. It was only a matter of time before our worlds collided again. Even though things between Lily and me had become clearer, I could feel a storm brewing. It was increasingly evident that Ben wouldn't let me win her heart without a fight. I had no time for hesitation and decided to act. I needed to break the last of the chains holding her back and put everything on the line. This was my battle, and I couldn't allow anyone to stop me. As Lily sat alone with her thoughts, I sensed that every passing moment brought us closer to the climax. Our relationship had grown complicated, filled with pressure and choices waiting ahead. I couldn't force her to forget Ben instantly, but her decision was a clear signal. She was ready to move forward. Still, I realized that Ben wouldn't surrender easily. His threats and anger wouldn't go unanswered. I couldn't be naive enough to think this would be simple. I couldn't afford to delay. That evening, as Lily and I sat on the couch, her phone rang. She hesitated briefly but quickly answered. It was Ben. I watched her face change, and my heart tightened with pain. She stood, looking anxious. My eyes followed her every movement. I knew this was the moment when she had to decide, once and for all. "You have to decide, Lily," I whispered as she turned back to me. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't forget. It was in that moment I realized the fight wasn't over yet. Later that night, when Lily hung up the phone, her eyes spoke louder than words. I knew that the conversation with Ben had changed her, and though she tried to hide it, I could feel it. She was on edge. That evening, the silence between us grew heavy and uncomfortable. We sat together, but the distance felt insurmountable. "He won't leave me alone," Lily said quietly, her voice steady but soft. Her words hit me like a blow. Ben was still there, still holding on to her. I looked at her, seeing her uncertainty and fear. My fight wasn't about revenge. It was about freeing her from this grip. "Lily, you don't have to be afraid of him," I said, trying to reassure her. "This is your choice." She lowered her gaze, and I understood her heart wasn't ready to sever the connection completely. But I couldn't let her remain in this situation. I couldn't let Ben take control again. "I'm scared, Jack," she admitted, her voice carrying a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. "I'm scared that everything will fall apart again, and I'll be left alone." I took her hand, and we sat in silence, waiting for what would happen next. A plan was already forming in my mind, but I knew it would require time and determination. That evening, when Lily mentioned Ben again, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. My patience with the situation had reached its limit. I knew that if I didn't act now, I would once again find myself overshadowed by his influence. I couldn't let Ben keep us in this limbo. I decided to act. Ben needed to understand he no longer had the right to stand between us. I had to rid myself of this burden, even if it meant going to extremes. I stepped outside and called Sarah. She was the last person I expected to ask for help, but her involvement was my only way to resolve this. "I need to deal with Ben," I said when she answered. "This time it'll be different." She fell silent, surprised. "Are you serious, Jack? What do you want from me?" "He won't leave Lily alone. I can't wait anymore. Help me and we'll end this." Sarah knew me well. She could tell I wasn't joking. "All right," she finally said, "but you need to be prepared for the consequences." I hung up and looked at the dark sky. That night, everything was about to change. The next day, I met with Ben. I didn't care what he thought or said. I was ready for this moment. All that remained was to put an end to this game. We met in a bar on the outskirts of town. I knew it was his kind of place, giving me a slight advantage. When I walked in, Ben was already sitting at a table. His face was serious, but his eyes burned with the aggression I knew all too well. He lifted his head as I approached and smirked, as if we were revisiting old times. "Well, Jack, finally decided to talk?" he asked, his sneer unchanged. I sat across from him, holding his gaze. My confidence was unwavering. I had already seen everything he had to offer. "Yes, I want to talk," I replied, staring him in the eyes. "I want you to leave Lily alone." He laughed, but I saw the tension creeping into his smile. He was trying to keep his composure, but I could tell he was nervous. "You're kidding, right?" he said, chuckling. "You think you can take her away from me?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed him a video. His expression shifted as he watched it. It was footage from his last encounter with Lily, where he vowed she would always be his. "This video changes everything, Ben," I said, watching his face pale. "I want you to understand. This is your last chance." He leaned back in his chair, but his laughter was gone. His gaze turned dark and threatening. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Jack," he muttered. "You're playing a dangerous game." I lifted my head and met his glare. He could see now that I wouldn't back down. Ben finally realized I was ready to go to the end, even if it meant losing everything. "I won't leave her alone, Ben. You can't stop this," I said, standing. "And if you don't like it, you know where to find me." I turned to leave but paused and added, "And one more thing. If you try anything, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." I felt confident, though my heart was racing. I knew this was just the beginning. Now we had a choice. Either everything stayed as it was or we unraveled this thread even further. After meeting Ben, I felt like I had emerged from cold water, dragged into a confrontation where there was no room for weakness. My resolve was stronger than ever, and now it was up to Lily to make the final decision. Ben was no longer the main obstacle. It all depended on her choice. When I got home, I saw Lily sitting on the couch. She looked thoughtful but as beautiful as always. Her eyes lacked the spark I'd seen before, but there was no indifference either. She seemed to be deep in thought. "How did it go?" she asked without lifting her gaze. I approached her and sat down beside her without answering immediately. I could sense a certain fear in her words, but also a desire to change something. That's when I decided to tell her the truth. "I talked to him. Now it's up to you, Lily. I can't wait any longer. You have to decide who is more important to you, Ben or me." She was silent, and the silence lingered for a long time. I knew that every word she said now mattered. I waited for her response, but my heart was beating faster with every passing moment. Finally, Lily looked up and met my gaze. I saw fear in her eyes, but at the same time, something new appeared: determination. "Jack, I I can't be with him any longer. I can't live a lie anymore. It all mattered to me. But I can see that true happiness is something I can only find with you. I felt a heavy shadow lift from my shoulders. Her words were precise, and now that she had made her choice, I could be at peace. I didn't feel like a winner, but this was the right decision for both of us. Are you sure you don't regret it? I asked, looking at her with slight doubt. She smiled faintly, her eyes clear and open. No, I don't regret it. It was a hard journey, but I choose you, Jack. I extended my hand to her, and she took it, allowing herself to finally feel calm. All this time, she had been torn, but now that she had made her choice, everything became clear. We sat in silence, simply holding hands. Thoughts about Ben still swirled in my mind, but I knew that now, with Lily's choice made, our struggle was over. A few days after Lily made her choice, we returned to normal life, but everything felt different. I could feel her loyalty, but at the same time, there was pressure weighing on me that I couldn't ignore. Ben wasn't leaving us alone. He constantly sent messages, called, and even tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances. I saw how nervous Lily became every time the phone rang, but she stayed strong. I decided to put an end to this story once and for all. Now that her choice was made, I couldn't let Ben threaten our relationship any longer. I knew everything would be difficult, but I was no longer afraid. My steps had become resolute. One evening, while I was at work, Lily received another message from Ben. She was on the edge again. I saw her hands trembling as she held her phone. I approached her quietly and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. He won't bother us anymore." There was something in her eyes, gratitude perhaps, but I could see she was still uncertain. She didn't want to face another confrontation, but I knew I had to act. This was the only way to put an end to it completely. I went to his house. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for anything. I respected Lily, but I couldn't let Ben ruin our future. When I arrived at his house, I felt my heart beating faster. But there were no doubts now. I felt my strength and determination. I knew the step would change everything. I knocked on the door. Ben opened it, and his face was one of someone expecting conflict. I looked at him without fear. "You will stop seeing Lily, Ben?" I said, my voice calm but firm. "If you continue, I will tell everyone the truth about what you've been trying to hide." I saw confusion and even fear in his eyes. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. He began to speak, but I didn't listen. I did what I had to do, and now that he knew he had lost, I walked away. After that, Ben never troubled us again. I returned to Lily, and we were finally able to leave that chapter of our lives behind. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had done what was right. In the end, it all came to a close as it should have. Lily was by my side, and I felt that together we could face anything. Now we could start a new chapter in our lives without looking back. This was my victory, and though I hadn't sought it, I felt that this was exactly what I needed. Now I want to hear your opinion. What would you have done in my place? Did I do the right thing? Or did I perhaps cross a line? And in general, what would you have done if this had happened to you? Share your thoughts in the comments because I truly want to know if I made the right choice. Or maybe there was another path we could have chosen. Share your feelings. I will definitely read all the comments.